In the heart of a prosperous African household, where tradition dictated every aspect of life, the grandeur of wealth was overshadowed by the silent suffering of one young woman. The compound was vast, adorned with intricate carvings, gold-stitched fabrics, and the constant sound of bustling servants. But among them was one who did not belong, not in the way she should have. Zala, born into this family by blood, was treated as an outsider, a shadow in the home that should have been her sanctuary. Her father, a respected merchant with influence spanning far and wide, had remarried after the passing of Zala's mother. His new wife, a woman of striking beauty and even sharper cruelty, ensured that Zala was never seen as more than an inconvenience. While her step-siblings adorned themselves in fine silk and jewelry, Zala's hands were roughened by endless chores. She scrubbed the floors of the grand halls, prepared lavish meals she was not allowed to eat, and mended garments that would never touch her own skin. The other servants whispered among themselves, sometimes offering her kindness in secret, but none dared to challenge the will of the mistress of the house. Zala's father, too occupied with his affairs, barely noticed how his daughter was reduced to a servant in his own home. When he did see her, she forced a smile, swallowing her pain, knowing that he would only dismiss her complaints as childish grievances. Yet, deep within her heart, she carried a quiet defiance. She would not allow herself to fade into nothingness. At night, when the rest of the household indulged in their wealth and pleasures, she would sit by the kitchen fire, staring into the flames, imagining a life beyond these walls. A life where she was more than just an invisible hand tending to others. It was during one of these nights that she overheard the cooks murmuring about an old legend, a tale of a woman who had suffered greatly but found a way to reclaim her destiny. A woman who had been wronged yet rose above her tormentors in ways they had never expected. The story spoke of patience, of waiting for the right moment, and when it arrived, of striking with the force of every injustice endured. Zala felt a shiver run down her spine. Was this legend merely a story told to pass the time, or was there a truth hidden within it? She clutched her tattered shawl, staring deeper into the fire, letting the embers burn the name of the story into her mind. Justice. Vengeance. Perhaps she was not as powerless as she had been led to believe. Perhaps her suffering would not be endless. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could carve her own path, one that would make the world remember her name. Zala's days began before the sun had a chance to rise. Before the household stirred, before laughter and music filled the grand halls, she was already at work. She cooked meals she would never taste, cleaned floors that others dirtied without thought, and toiled under the weight of expectations that did not belong to her. The scent of roasted meat and spiced stews would fill the air, but when the feast began she was expected to retreat into the shadows, her stomach empty, her body exhausted. Her stepmother, with her piercing gaze and sharp tongue, ensured that Zala's place remained beneath them. The woman found pleasure in degrading her, making a spectacle of her before guests, using her as an example of what happened when one was born weak. "This is what becomes of a girl without a mother's love," she would say with mock sympathy, while her own children sneered. Zala stood still, her head lowered, swallowing back the humiliation, but she never forgot. The village saw what was happening, but silence was easier than confrontation. People pitied her, but pity did not lift her burdens. She often ran errands through the market, carrying heavy sacks on her back while her step-siblings strolled freely, their hands empty. The merchants would look at her with knowing eyes but said nothing. To defy a powerful family was to invite trouble upon oneself. But not everyone looked away. There was an elder in the village, a woman known for her wisdom and patience. She had seen many seasons, had lived through both joy and sorrow, and when she saw Zala, she saw a girl on the brink of something greater. When no one was watching, she would slip Zala small pieces of fruit, a rare kindness in a world that demanded her suffering. More valuable than the fruit were her words, spoken in hushed tones. "Do not let them break you. A storm does not announce itself before it strikes." Zala held on to those words, repeating them when the weight of her life felt unbearable. She did not weep when she was pushed to the ground, when her hands bled from endless labor, or when her stomach clenched from hunger. Instead she watched. She listened. Her stepmother's cruelty was not without flaw. The woman was desperate to maintain control, to keep up the illusion of a perfect household. But cracks had begun to show, debts that needed paying, secrets whispered behind closed doors. The family's wealth was not as endless as it appeared. The servants, though fearful, resented their mistress. Even her own children, spoiled and arrogant, spoke of their mother with bitterness when they thought no one was listening. Zala took note of every weakness, every vulnerability. She was powerless now, but power was not always in strength. It was in knowledge, in patience, in waiting for the right moment. She may have been forced into servitude, but she would not remain a servant forever. In the quietest corner of the village, where the trees grew thick and the air carried whispers of forgotten times, Zala met the one person who saw her not as a servant, but as something far greater. The old woman's hut was hidden behind tangled vines, a place few dared to visit. She was known by many names, witch, seer, healer, but Zala knew her simply as Mama Osi. It was hunger that had first drawn Zala to the outskirts of the village, where Mama Osi's fire always burned, the scent of roasted yams and herbs floating through the air. But the old woman did not simply offer food, she offered knowledge, the kind that made men uneasy and women careful. "You carry fire in your eyes," Mama Osi said one evening as Zala sat by the flickering flames, hands stretched out for warmth. "A fire they do not see. But I see it. And one day it will consume them." Zala wasn't sure if she believed in such things. She had lived her life caged, powerless against the cruelty of her family. But something about Mama Osi's words planted a seed inside her, something small but unshakable. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, the old woman spoke of an ancient ritual, one that called upon the spirits of justice, those who did not sleep until balance was restored. It was not a simple spell, nor was it a plea for mercy. It was a demand, an invocation of forces that did not forgive, that did not hesitate. "They will come only for the bold," Mama Osi warned. "For those who are ready to take what is theirs." Zala felt the weight of the words settle deep in her bones. She had spent years swallowing her pain, hiding her anger. But now, something in her was shifting. She began to train, not in the way of warriors with swords or fists, but in patience, in silence, in strategy. She learned the movements of her family, the weaknesses they did not realize they had. She listened when they whispered behind closed doors, memorized the cracks in their unity. Her stepmother, so drunk on her own power, never suspected the servant girl who walked the halls unnoticed. Her step-siblings, too self-absorbed, never questioned why Zala no longer flinched at their cruelty. They thought her broken, too worn down to fight back. But she was not broken. She was waiting. Each night, she met with Mama Osi, learning the ways of the spirits, the secrets of those who had come before her. The old woman showed her how to mark the earth with symbols that called upon the unseen, how to speak words that carried the weight of generations. When the time came, when the stars aligned and the air grew heavy with the scent of something ancient stirring, Zala knew her moment was near. Each morning, Zala moved through the grand household as she always had, silent, obedient, invisible. Her hands scrubbed the stone floors, her fingers kneaded dough for bread she would never taste, her body ached from the weight of her family's cruelty. But beneath her quiet exterior, she was no longer the servant girl they believed her to be. She was a shadow watching, listening, waiting. Her stepmother, Lady Abina, held the household in an iron grip, her sharp tongue and colder heart keeping even the most powerful villagers in check. Her wealth was vast, her influence far-reaching. Yet beneath the layers of silk and gold, her power had cracks Zala had learned to see. She knew of the stolen grain meant for the village, hoarded in secret beneath the great storehouse. She had overheard the whispered bribes to the village elders, the money exchanged to silence questions. She had seen the way her stepmother turned away the hungry, how she let children starve while her own feasted on excess. Zala's plan had to be perfect. A single mistake would cost her everything. She began planting doubts. A missing bag of grain here, a rumor whispered near the market there. The servants spoke freely in the kitchens, unaware that their gossip reached the wrong ears. "The spirits are angry," they muttered. "The ancestors see the greed in this house." Then she moved on to the elders. She learned which of them were weak, which feared the spirits and the weight of the ancestors' judgment. She let them hear her quiet prayers at the shrine, prayers not of vengeance but of truth. "Let the wrongs of this house be seen," she murmured, just loud enough for the right ears to listen. The spirits of justice stirred. The winds howled at night, carrying whispers through the trees. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen. Those who still honored the old ways began to sense it. Lady Abina grew restless. She watched Zala more closely, her eyes lingering on her longer than before. "You move differently," she accused one evening, her voice sharp as a blade. "I am only as I have always been," Zala replied with lowered eyes, hiding the fire burning beneath her skin. But time was running out. Her stepmother's paranoia grew and soon she would start looking for someone to blame. Zala needed the final piece of her plan. She took the stolen grain and scattered it in the village square, where the hungry would find it. She took the letters of bribery and slipped them beneath the chief elder's door. She made sure the people saw, heard, and whispered. And then, on the night of the full moon, when the village gathered beneath the great baobab tree, Zala stepped forward. Her voice rang out, not in anger, not in hatred, but in truth. "The ancestors see all," she said. "And tonight they will have justice." And her family, blind in their arrogance, would never see it coming. The village square brimmed with murmurs and restless movement as torches flickered against the dark sky. Shadows stretched across the earth, twisting like silent witnesses to the night's unfolding events. Word had spread like wildfire, something had shifted, something long hidden was about to be revealed. The people gathered beneath the great baobab tree, their eyes filled with curiosity, apprehension, and an unspoken hunger for truth. Zala stepped forward, her heart steady, her pulse a drumbeat of determination. No longer did she bow her head in submission. No longer did she shrink beneath the weight of her family's cruelty. Tonight she stood tall, not as a servant but as the voice of justice itself. "I have called you here," she began, her voice carrying through the night, "to speak the truth that has been buried for too long." The villagers watched as she stepped aside, revealing the stolen grain sacks she had dragged to the center of the square, the letters of bribery she had placed in the elders' hands earlier that evening. The silence that followed was thick, charged with something unseen, something ancient. A gust of wind swept through the crowd, rattling the wooden charms hung at the shrine. The spirits were listening. Lady Abina stepped forward, her face a mask of carefully controlled fury. "This is madness," she spat. "This girl is filled with lies and poison. She is nothing but a servant, seeking to bring ruin upon her own family." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncertain and uneasy. But then the elder priest, a man who had long watched the household in quiet judgment, raised a trembling hand. "The ancestors do not heed liars," he said. "And yet the wind howls tonight. The spirits stir. We must listen." The ground beneath them trembled, not a quake, not a natural shift but something else. The torches burned brighter, their flames stretching toward the sky as if pulled by unseen hands. A low whisper, not of man, not of beast, echoed through the air. Lady Abina paled. "This is trickery," she shrieked. "You would believe the words of a mere girl over the honor of my house?" One of the elders unfurled the letters, reading aloud the proof of her deception, the bribes, the hoarding, the greed. The villagers gasped, their murmurs turning to anger. The poor had suffered while her household flourished. Children had starved while they feasted in excess. "Enough." Another elder rose, his voice firm. "The ancestors have spoken. The truth cannot be hidden any longer. Justice must be served." Lady Abina tried to resist, her steps faltering as she turned to her children for support, but they shrank back, fear in their eyes. The power she had wielded so cruelly had turned against her. The villagers surged forward, no longer afraid. Zala stood at the center of it all, watching as her chains, both invisible and real, shattered. She had fought, she had suffered, and now she had won. She was no longer a slave to her family. She was free. The morning after the reckoning, the village awoke to an air of transformation. The house that once stood as a monument to cruelty now bore the marks of justice. Lady Abina and her children, stripped of their ill-gotten status, faced the consequences of their actions. The elders decreed that they would work to repay the suffering they had caused, no longer masters but equals among the very people they had oppressed. The villagers, once fearful of their power, now looked upon them with hardened gazes, ensuring that their cruelty would never be forgotten. Zala, for the first time in her life, stood as her own person, not bound by servitude nor fear. The weight on her shoulders, once unbearable, had lifted, leaving in its place a strength she had never known she possessed. As she walked through the village, people bowed their heads, not in pity but in reverence. She had become a symbol, a living testament that even the most broken could rise. The spirits of justice had not yet left. The wind hummed with their presence, swirling around Zala like an unseen force. That night, beneath the ancient baobab tree where the ancestors watched over the land, she felt their call. A voice, neither male nor female, neither old nor young, whispered to her from the beyond. "You have done what many feared to do. You have called upon us and we have answered. Now we give you a choice." Before her, two visions unfolded. In one she saw herself seated upon a high throne, ruling with wisdom and strength. Villages united under her name, and the weak never suffered again. The people looked to her not just as a leader, but as a force of destiny itself. Power would be hers, and with it the ability to shape the future. In the second vision she saw peace. Not the kind born of power but of personal freedom. She walked the lands as a wanderer, sharing the stories of her struggle, teaching others how to stand against oppression. Her name became a song passed through generations, a whisper of courage that ignited hearts long after she was gone. The spirits waited. The wind stilled. The village, though asleep, seemed to hold its breath. Zala closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settle within her. She had spent her life in chains, chains of servitude, chains of hatred, chains of expectation. Power was tempting, intoxicating even, but she knew that true strength did not lie in ruling over others. It lay in guiding them, in showing them the path so they too could rise. When she opened her eyes, the choice had been made. The spirits murmured in approval, their presence fading like the last embers of a fire. She would not be a queen nor a tyrant. She would be something greater, a legend, a story that never died, a name spoken whenever the weak found their courage. And so, Zala stepped forward, leaving behind her past, walking toward a future she had chosen for herself. The sun rose over the village, casting golden light on a land that had been forever changed. For the first time in years, Zala felt the warmth of the morning not as a prisoner, but as a woman reborn. The burdens of the past had been lifted, and she stood at the threshold of a new life, one she had fought for with every ounce of her spirit. The village too was transformed. The fear that once loomed over its people had vanished. No longer did they lower their heads in submission. No longer did they tolerate cruelty disguised as tradition. The elders, having witnessed the power of justice firsthand, declared new laws to prevent the rise of another tyrant like Lady Abina. Every voice, no matter how small, was to be heard. Every person, no matter their status, was to be treated with dignity. Zala walked through the village with a quiet grace, her presence commanding respect without the need for force. Children ran to her, their eyes filled with admiration, eager to hear the tale of how she had risen from nothing. Mothers whispered her name as they told their daughters to be strong, to never accept injustice as fate. The men, once blind to the suffering of the women around them, now stood as protectors, ensuring that no one endured what Zala had. She did not forget the one who had guided her through the darkness. The elder woman, frail but wise, watched as the village flourished in the wake of change. Zala knelt before her, taking the old woman's hands in hers. "You gave me hope when I had none," she said. "You showed me that I was more than a servant, more than what they made me believe. I will spend my life honoring the gift you gave me." The elder smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. "Then you must do as I once did, help those who cannot yet help themselves. Be the light in their darkness, just as you found your own." With those words, Zala made a vow. She would not simply revel in her freedom, she would use it to lift others from despair. She began to travel, venturing to distant villages where whispers of suffering reached her ears. She shared her story, teaching those who felt powerless how to stand, how to fight, how to reclaim their worth. As the years passed, the name of Zala became more than just a memory. It became a legend. Mothers told their children of the girl who had once been a slave to her own family, but who had risen to become a force of change. Elders recounted the story by firelight, ensuring that no generation would forget the lesson she had taught. No one is born to be a slave. No one is bound by fate. And as Zala walked toward the horizon, her heart light with the promise of tomorrow, she knew that her story was not an ending, but the beginning of many more to come.